Hello. Welcome to the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum. This is episode 8. And we're building a community that's approaching 400 strong and growing from 6 countries and 3 continents that we're aware of. And this community is you, of course, and coming from diverse locations, congregation sizes, and faiths. At the level we're working, denomination is really transparent. And I think that coming together in this way is such a beautiful thing. And we are but one in a related set of communities similar to ours. If you're interested in a similar forum focused on Jewish worship, Leo on our panel here hosts a Sunday afternoon show at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. He can provide a link to that in the Discord. And if you're an educator at any level, whether a teacher or administrator or interested in technology for educators, you want to check out the Office Hours show on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Look for links in the Discord under related shows. And Office Hours itself, which happens every day at 10 o'clock Eastern Time, is just an amazing show that many of us here on the panel serve on their panel, and that touches on everything technological about remote events. And so it's your engagement that keeps this community strong, because it's not just you learning from us. We're all learning from each other. All of the professionals on this panel will tell you that while our clients hire us for what we know, we're learning new things all the time from our clients. And we've already learned a whole lot of things from the information that you have provided us in the Discord, answers to questions, the questions that you ask, telling us about your congregations, about your sizes, about your services. And more importantly, many of you have shared information with others that have helped everybody in the community. So that's exactly why we've provided you with this platform for interactive engagement all week long, day and night. If you haven't already joined, there's an invitation link in the to our Discord in the Zoom chat right now. And that's where you'll find 24/7 opportunities for discussion and Q&A with our panelists, future show agendas, past show recordings, and special announcements. It's also where we take your questions during this show live, like right now. If you have questions, put them in the Discord. Start putting them in now so that we can answer them. And you'll find that under the category named Live Show. And speaking of questions, it's time for the question of the day. How confident are you in your AV skills when you return to in-person services after not doing it for more than a year? So tell us about that. Tell us about your stories. Now, over the past 7 weeks, we've been focusing on the transition from virtual to hybrid ministry and congregational life, covering technical and non-technical issues alike. And we have begun now to shift our focus to more technical issues and production skills, techniques to help you present high-quality, engaging online and in-person experiences. Eventually, we'll offer opportunities for you to share your work so that we can see each other's progress. So keep that in mind over the next few weeks. Set aside parts of your services or your online presentations that you'd like to either show off or ask advice about. Now, you may ask, how do we decide what topics we talk about on each show? Ask, you might. The answer is we listen to you. What we do is we watch the Discord for your questions and discussions so that we can learn what issues are most pressing for you. So let us know how we're doing and what you'd like us to talk about and what you would like to talk about. We're even talking about scheduling another day specifically for very deep technical training. So very focused, very specific stuff. So what training would you like? Tell us in the Discord, in the channel called Technical Priority Number 8, Training. Next week will be April Fool's Day, so we'll look at a some famous Zoom fails, and perhaps what you can do to prevent similar experiences. And we'll also announce the 3 winners of our needs assessment contest. No fooling. So pay attention for that. We've had a lot of entries and they're all really good. And it's our task to select the 3 winners as we promised. So we're going to do that next week. So let's get into it. You've been away from your sanctuary and your AV systems for over a year now. And when you left, the last time you were there, you had no idea that that was going to be your last Sunday. So what can you expect when you go back to turn your sound system on, your video systems on, your projectors and your wireless microphones and everything else? Will everything work exactly as it did over a year ago? What effects could this much time have had on each of the parts of an AV system? Like wires, cables, wireless microphones. I don't know. Panelists, what do you think? Jay?
There are a lot of things that need to be checked when you return to Sanctuary. And if you'll give me a moment, I will get a PowerPoint slideshow up for your viewing pleasure.
Here's what I found.
Hush, Siri, I wasn't talking to you.
Gotta love technology.
Yeah, when it's cooperative, I always do.
I'm so glad that.
What's that?
I'm so glad I'm not the only one that happens to.
Oh, that happens to me all the time. I think part of it is just keeping my wristwatch on a little too tight. So I'm always hitting that button. Okay. Let's see if you can see my screen. Am I visible?
Yes, you are.
All right, so we're talking about returning to the sanctuary, and probably the first thing I would recommend you do is walk around the building and check all the areas where you operate. Check your sound booth if you have a sound booth. Make sure that any equipment, any loose things that you had stored, that they're still there. That things weren't borrowed and not returned. Nothing was stolen. That all the things that you left, they're still there when you come back. Was there any environmental damage when you were gone? Water, mildew, mold, insects? I have had an experience of insects getting into loudspeakers. It's worth doing a full loop around all the places you either use, operate, or store your equipment. Lighting systems. So, it's conceivable that, nothing has changed, but you haven't been in the sanctuary maybe for a whole year. Check and make sure that your lighting systems work, both house and if you have stage lighting for the platform, any instruments that are focused. It's worth walking around, making sure everything that's connected operates, that it lights up. That when you push a fader on a dimmer, that it illuminates, and that it's linear as you increase move the fader up. You're seeing the lamp get brighter. That your instruments are focused. That things are where you expect them. If you have specials, for example, aimed at a lectern for your minister, or you have any other lighting that everything's aimed where you expect it to be. It's worth taking a look if you're using gels for your lamps, that if there are any burned out gels, that's an opportunity to inspect and replace. Dimmers work. Control panels, that everything's controllable. So in my sanctuary, we have 2 main ways to control lighting. We've got a small panel at the vestibule when you enter, so you can turn on house lights. I think we have 8 or 9 presets for different conditions in the room, and not all of them are necessarily related to every type of event and function that happens in the room, but that's a place to check and make sure it works. We have a lighting console that's in the sound booth. You can turn on the lighting console and make sure that console can take control, and from that point that everything is operable from the console. We also have a Crestron controller, touch panel in 2 locations. Those panels can also recall lighting presets. So it's worth checking to make sure that everything's operable from every location that you anticipate operating, and that when you recall a preset for something, go through all the scenes. Make sure that if you had lighting presets established for different activities in the room or on the platform, that they're all intact. It's always possible that somebody could have been working with a lighting console. They could have stored a preset, and you recall the preset expecting lighting to work for, let's say, dimming at the lectern or platform so that you could have projection without a lighting wash. So make sure that everything works. Marty, or anybody, did I miss anything on that?
I was going to recommend that if you have old school lights with halogen lamps in them, get them running and burning, because all that dust that's settled is going to smell bad for a while. And rather than panicking the congregation the first time they smell all of that, burn that stuff off now before your first service.
And that really applies for everything electronic. Everything that looks to be in good condition should be powered up. But we'll caution you that you want to clean things before you do. So if you have power amplifiers running your loudspeakers, most larger power amps all have filters, and filters can be removed, they can be cleaned, and they can put back on the amplifier. That's one of the things you're definitely going to want to do, because if the filters get clogged, then the amplifier won't be able to stay cool. It'll overheat. It'll shut off during a service. Nobody wants that to happen. Same thing, other devices that are in your system, you could conceivably have filters on other things like larger, digital mixing consoles, computers, etc. So you're going to want to make sure everything is clean and dust free. With regard to your sound system, so mixing consoles, you're going to want to check every fader, every pot. You're going to want to, push the fader. You're going to want to listen to it with an input source. It could be a microphone. It could be a computer, or, a media player of some type. But you want to make sure that every single input and output is operable. And that you're not hearing scratchy pots, dead spots and faders, things like that. When you find those things, have a checklist, create a checklist. When you find something askew, note it. If you have a systems integrator who's installed your system and there's still somebody you do business with, that's a service call. It's probably best to go through every single item in your system and make that list, and with that list intact if you need things to be repaired. And as I mentioned, you want to do this a couple of weeks before you go back into the sanctuary, excuse me. And the reason you want to get in early is if you have a problem with anything and it requires parts to be shipped in, if it requires something to be removed and taken to a service location, you're going to want to have time. You're going to want to, you don't want to be stuck that you have a piece of equipment you need and it's not operable. If you do, your mixing console dies, you may need to go get rent another console to come in and substitute. If it's something like a digital mixing console where you have all the settings stored for your services, you're probably going to want to find the same unit so that you can, if possible, take the settings out of one, put them into a replacement while your unit's being serviced. And we already talked a little bit about filters, so check amplifiers, make sure all speakers are generating a sound. Again, it's not likely. Amplifiers are pretty durable. Generally, mixing consoles are pretty durable. Generally, speakers are pretty durable. But but durable doesn't mean impervious to damage. Loudspeakers. So certainly you want to visually inspect. You're going to want to check them for audible distortion. Things to worry about with loudspeakers. Again, most loudspeaker low frequency, mid frequency drivers, they're paper cones. So you can have things like dry rot, get to them. I've actually had the surround, which is the foam that goes around the speaker cone. It's pliable so that the cone can move back and forth. I went into an installation where almost all of them dry rotted out of every single loudspeaker in speaker columns that had 32 drivers in each column. How do you fix that? You got to replace them. Now, again, is it likely? No. If your sanctuary was, your systems, environmental systems were functional, humidity was, reasonably controlled, heat, etc. Then some of the possibilities, certainly could be if amplifiers were left on, could something happen where an amplifier oscillated and took a speaker out? Absolutely could. Some loudspeakers have amplifiers built into them and processing built into them. If they're remote controllable and accessible, you probably shut them off before you left. If you didn't, it's certainly conceivable that you could have some kind of an electrical disturbance that would take either an electronic component out, or it could take out the loudspeaker driver itself. The last thing on the list is rigging. Again, if speakers are professionally suspended, somebody who hangs the speakers, they use the right hardware. The speaker was designed to be attached. There was no potential damage to it because somebody pushed a lift into something while they were doing a check. Chances are things are in good shape, but it never hurts to go back and take a look. Again, things like speaker cabinets, they can deteriorate. Again, anything that's built to fly, I would say almost all the time is built out of pretty heavy duty plywood, is using rated hardware for suspension points, but it's never a bad idea to go take a look around and just make sure everything looks intact. Mark or Marty or anyone have anything to add to that?
Well, I would say look at your XLR cables, all of your microphone cables. They are subject to deterioration and oxidation. So if you take a look at this, and maybe we'll have David spotlight this, these are the connectors out of a male XLR. So that would be the end that you're plugging into your mixer. And you can see that the one on the right is bright gold, which is good. If it's anything other than bright gold or bright silver, then you've got some issues. You see the one on the very left is slightly oxidized. That's not terrible, but should certainly be cleaned. And you see the one in the middle, although this one has 4 pins, that's really inconsequential. See how black it is? This has got a lot of oxidation covering it, and that's going to interrupt the electrical signal. This is like just dirt on the connectors, and you really don't want to have that. Similarly, for 1/4-inch plugs like guitar cords and headphone jacks, anything that plugs into a keyboard, for instance, it's very interesting that the physical contact area for those electrical connections is extremely small because it's a round barrel, and the jack only contacts one little part of that barrel. So it needs to be completely cleaned in order to have a reliable electrical connection. The other thing I would recommend is looking at your wireless transmitters. We had one, those where the battery compartment, the cover on the battery compartment is spring-loaded.
Let me interject for a quick second. So I saw a hand up. Could we just, refer everybody to Discord for any questions
Yep.
that you have while we go through this section? We have a we have a section, I think it's called live show questions in the Discord. If you'll put your questions in, Joanna will be looking at them and she will flag them as we go.
All right.
Speaking of which, before you get up beyond the XLRs, a question was asked specifically about cleaning the XLRs, asking steel wool, alcohol. One of my favorites for doing XLRs is a little bit of Brasso on the end of a Q-tip. That way you can get in all around the connector, get it cleaned out, and then a little bit of just a little bit of water to rinse the Brasso away. Often works well. If you know of another metal cleaner that works better than Brasso, you know.
How about Noxon? Just a
And
regular.
I'm
Noxon, yeah.
So
yeah.
I have
blue and Kremlin red.
I have a couple of things that I use. So WD-40 have two specialist ones. The first one is they have one which is fast contact cleaner. So I use the fast contact cleaner from WD-40, which is isopropanol, if I can pronounce it correctly. It's just a fast contact cleaner, and I use that on any sliders and things like that. The other one I would suggest getting, it's got nothing to do with cleaning, but it does, is their, if you've come across this, is they call it their dry friction. It's dry PTFE. This is basically the glide mechanism inside of normal WD-40, but in a dry format. So you can put this in things like key slot, in a key lock, and it won't leave any grease on anything. You can use it on plastic to plastic. So if you've got something that's literally, you've got anything that's gone and got really stiff, the dry PTFE one, you'll be amazed. It even stops your chair squeaking if you've got leather chairs. It's a great thing. And then the last thing I always have related is I would never buy the air in the cans for cleaning out stuff. If you get one of these, they're they're mainly for computer repair. People have these. They're for blowing out the dust in computers when you do it. You'll be amazed, but be careful. You can literally blow things off if you push it too hard. But it's a much more cost-effective way than getting you see them all over the place, the air in the can. But you can get one of these and it clears and cleans everything out.
Oh, thanks for that. By the way, Leo, you're about 10 dB hot.
So real quick, I'm holding up a product called Deoxit D5. This is made by Kaig Laboratories, CAIG. They originated the Kremlin formulas. I think this is what was Kremlin Red is now Deoxit D5, and I recommend that highly for cleaning connectors. So it's a clean and a lube.
Great. And Jay, you're way hot too.
Yeah, well, I was right up on the microphone. Sorry.
Okay. So the other thing to watch, to really look out for is anything that was battery powered. If you left your batteries in your devices, like wireless transmitters, guitar tuners, DI boxes, any of that stuff, you may come back to find your batteries looking like this. Now,
Those are special.
this is pretty nasty stuff. This is battery acid that is leaked out of the batteries. And when this gets into the battery terminals on your device, it is really, really, really difficult to clean out. I mean, you need specialized tools and devices to get this stuff out because it is extremely corrosive. So pay particular attention to that.
Incidentally, Fran Blanche of Fran Labs did a YouTube on various battery manufacturers and which ones leak the least. It was an interesting study of why do they do it and who's do it the least.
I'd be interested in seeing that.
It's also worth mentioning that every single microphone should be checked. Every mic.
Yeah,
should
we
be
were
turned on.
getting there.
Oh, I thought you were done. Sorry.
No, I wasn't. Still in process. So yeah, microphones need to be tested. Wired and wireless. Each has wired microphones obviously are a lot more durable than wireless microphones, and generally unless they're ribbon microphones, and I suspect probably few people are using portable ribbon microphones, are pretty darn durable. But you're still going to want to plug in, test everything, listen to everything. It's worth, making sure connectors can go in all the way, they seated properly, and they stay locked. I would say if you're plugging microphones in and exercising connectors, if they're condenser microphones, bring the fader down substantially, because when condenser microphone connectors mate and break, you could have 48 volts that will send a pretty loud crack through your sound system. It will be loud and annoying, and it could actually damage something. So I would say be cautious if you're wiggling connectors in condenser microphones. With wireless microphones, they all have batteries. Hopefully you didn't leave batteries in your microphone for a year. Not that you couldn't have left rechargeable batteries and left microphones charging. Ideally, you didn't. But I would think that if you had a microphone that's got a manufacturer supplied battery and it's in the manufacturer supplied charger, it is likely to be okay.
That being said, there are certain manufacturers of battery-powered microphones with built-in batteries that, if left charging for too long, they swell up and break the case.
That is a possibility.
I see it most often with older wireless touch panels. They used to expand and crack open.
The other thing you're going to want to check with microphones is wireless microphones, they operate in an environment where other wireless devices coexist. And, if you have other wireless microphones that operate in the same frequency range, in the same or similar, where they could interfere and in, reasonable proximity to your sanctuary, you could have another wireless microphone in another room if you weren't aware of it and they weren't aware of you and no frequency coordination was done. They could interfere with your microphone and make it unreliable or even inoperable. So it's one of those things you're going to want to, evaluate when you go back. Is there anybody else operating within proximity of you that's going to use a wireless microphone at the same time you're using one? And when they operate together, are your microphones still operating properly, and are theirs? Microphone frequency coordination is something that is can often be done by going to your wireless microphone's manufacturer's website, and often they will give you a calculator or tool where you can validate that microphones can work with each other, so that so if you have multiple microphones, they're frequency coordinated so that they don't create problems for you. And you can, if you've got the frequencies for other microphones, and again, in my sanctuary is it's a multi-faith center. So we have three functional places where people could do worship simultaneously. We don't often overlap, but somebody could have a special event while we're holding a service, or vice versa. So it's just something to be aware of, to pay attention to. That if you had a wireless microphone that was working great on Sunday afternoon and then Sunday evening something's causing you trouble, it's worth trying to validate if somebody nearby is also operating a wireless microphone. On the video side of the world, video projectors. If you have an installed video projector, I'm like 99% sure it's got a filter, because projectors need to be kept cool, and those filters need to be kept clean. You don't want a projector overheating. You're going to want to clean the projector lens. You're going to want to check lamp life. Maybe one thing to keep in mind on higher, it's probably more worrisome on higher powered projectors. Lamps can spontaneously decide to become grenades. So you're going to want to if they're if you're using a really high powered multi-lamp projector And even if you're not, check the lamp life. Make sure that your lamps are not exceeding their intended life for two reasons. One, you don't want a lamp to go out during a service, even if you have a 2-lamp projector. Really large projectors can have 4 lamps. But also, as time goes on, the lamp's efficiency changes, and you will lose illumination capacity, and you'll have color shift. So pay attention to lamp life. Most projectors have a ability for you to check the running hours on a lamp, and replace lamps that are near the end of life. Check your image. Is it in focus? Are you displaying the resolutions that you expect and anticipate? Keystone correction if necessary. Again, chances are if a projector has been secure, it's not moving, nobody's fooling with anything, nobody got a hold of a remote and decided they could do a better job of setting up a projector than the person who had it up and operational, things can change. Can you display all the sources that you expect to be able to display or have displayed before successfully on the projector? So check your projector with your sources, with your PowerPoint, with your media player, whatever you happen to be using to feed the projector. Marty, or you have anything to add to that?
Let's see. Well, cleaning the lenses on your cameras and your projectors is really important. Cleaning the microphones. So microphone sanitation is an important thing, especially moving forward. It's not something that we pay particular attention to, but think about how intimate singers get with their microphones during a performance. Especially if you're singing rock and roll or blues or something like that, that's passionate. Be a really good idea to take the grills off of those vocal microphones, soak them in warm soapy water. Even the foam that's inside those grills can take a soaking, as long as the water is not too hot and the soap is not particularly harsh. And then just set them out in the sun to dry. Let them do this, and that's something that's worth doing, like every week if you're going to be really conscientious about it.
I would add that if you have multiple people using microphones now during a service or an event, I've used Listerine to clean windscreens, give them a wipe in between performers. That will at least sanitize the microphone. People can get very up close and personal with their microphones. Whether they will continue to that in the age of COVID-19, I don't know, but I'd be careful about that.
Mm-hmm. So we also have a few questions. Joanna,
Okay.
do you want to take us through some?
I didn't see any questions. I saw a question from Keith. I'm sorry. There's one question from Tay Moss saying steel wool for cleaning XLR contacts okay, or just alcohol rub?
We covered that.
There's a variety of things you can use for XLRs.
I don't know that I'm going to advise. I wouldn't necessarily use steel wool on a connector, and the reason I wouldn't is you could take off the coating of the connector terminals itself. So a lot of microphones have got a thin layer of gold, and I wouldn't necessarily want to I wouldn't want to express them to any particular duress. I know in the old days we used to use burnitures on like patch bays with and contact cleaner, and while you take off some of the corrosion, you would also take off some of the plating. You may not, if you're going to use something like that, you want to be I would say very gentle and judicious. I would go to a good contact cleaner and a cotton swab or a foam swab before I went to steel wool.
Yeah, I think a good rule of thumb is the least amount of pressure and wear that you can put on the contacts, the better. And I'd add that it's much easier to clean those contacts if you take the connector apart, especially on the male connectors. So have the contacts exposed like I showed in the pictures, and then it's much easier to access the contacts. Female connectors are a lot more difficult because you cannot expose those connectors. So I would just spray some contact cleaner right down the barrel.
I was going to say if you clean if you clean the male connector and you have a little bit of the contact cleaner on it, you can, by inserting and pulling apart the two connectors, you're going to get some cleaning action from that.
Now, Keith also asked another interesting question about rechargeable batteries and that haven't been charged or discharged in over a year. Rechargeable batteries is they don't work like regular batteries, obviously. They won't necessarily degrade over time if you don't charge them, but they might not recharge to full capacity the first time you do.
The memory effect.
Well, not just because of the memory effect, but because they become what's called deformed. So brand new, fresh, rechargeable battery will need to be charged and discharged several times before it reaches its peak capacity and lasts as long as it can. The first time or two that you charge it, it may not last as long as it will after the fourth charge. And some chargers actually have a forming mode that will actually do this automatically. It will charge the battery, discharge the battery, and go through several cycles for you as an automatic function. So that's something to keep in mind. Charge your batteries, discharge your batteries. But they won't necessarily, they won't leak like non-rechargeable batteries will, unless they're in really bad shape. Also, by charging and discharging, you'll get a much better idea of what their actual capacity really is, because batteries do age. Rechargeable batteries, after a certain number of charge-recharge cycles, they won't hold their charge as long as they used to. So it's good to know what the battery's conditions are.
I would add to that, battery technology's obviously improved a whole lot over the last. If I go back to when I started trying to use rechargeable batteries and wireless microphones, we're going back to the 80s, and we had to pay ridiculous attention to charging cycles and how long a battery stayed in a charger, making sure that we didn't exceed anticipated life. What I'll say is about today's wireless microphones is that the battery technology is much better, but also the telemetry and information you get from the microphone. So a lot of modern receivers will tell you what the battery life is in the microphone as the microphone's being used. And the chargers are smart enough to tell you when it's time to replace a battery. Now, they're not inexpensive batteries, and when you buy that battery, you're not buying just the battery. You're also buying the electronics that manage, the charging of the battery and help with the reporting side of things. So if you've got a wireless microphone and you're using a third-party battery, just be prepared. You're not going to get the same type of maybe durability out of it, longevity out of it as you would if you bought a wireless microphone that came with a manufacturer supplied battery, rechargeable battery, and a recharging system.
Also, I'd add to that that battery chargers are not all created equal. Some battery chargers are much better than others. And a battery charger is an integral part of your battery system. Mm-hmm. So if you have the choice, buy the better battery charger, one that maybe even has a display on it that shows you the conditions of the batteries. The other tip I would have is when you're putting multiple batteries in a device, always use the same brand and model battery.
Yeah.
Don't mix them up. The other tip I would offer is that keep a little multimeter handy, because when you use multiple batteries, whether they be alkalins or rechargeables, you'll always get better performance when the battery voltages match. So if you have one battery that is showing you 2.1 volts and another battery that is showing you 1.9 volts, I would not necessarily use those batteries together in the same device. Try to find batteries that have the same voltage.
I would add buy an actual battery checker. They're fairly inexpensive, and they put the battery under load when they test them. But a multimeter is something I think everybody should have as part of their kit, whether it's for checking battery or continuity in a cable. Although I also recommend having cable testers where you can plug the cable in and see that you have continuity, open or short circuit on every conductor in a cable as well. It's a fairly inexpensive thing to have, but it will save you a lot of time troubleshooting when you can just say, well, I checked the cable was bad, replace the cable.
That's really good advice, because you think about a microphone wire. There's 3 conductors in that wire, and one of them wraps around the other 2. And because they're under jackets and inside connectors, you can't see these wires. You can't see the connectors. You can't see the solder joints inside.
Unless you pull them apart. Yeah.
Unless you pull them apart. And then even sometimes the shield that wraps around the 2 inner conductors could go bad in the middle of a wire. If it's stepped on, if it's rolled over by a heavy case or a piano, for goodness
Sure.
sake.
Yeah.
Those defects can be hidden, and what you'll hear is intermittent audio. If it's a condenser microphone, you'll get a lot of scratching and crackling, which is
Well, if you lose that shield connection, you won't power the condenser mic anymore. That shield is the electrical return for phantom power.
That's right.
And yeah, if it's intermittent, you may get some really noisy cracks and pops through your system as the cable makes and breaks contact internally.
And so when you're testing a cable using a cable tester that looks at all 3 pins at the same time, move that wire around. Don't just connect them and say good or not good. Move them around. Move the wire around at each connector. Move it around in the middle of the cable, all over, and make sure that that it's solid all the way around. Let's see. George Carville makes an interesting comment. He says, "Don't forget that mice may have been chewing on things."
They may. Yep.
Yep. Mice go after wire insulation all the time. They'll go into very small holes like the ports of loudspeakers. They'll go into the back of your rack.
Yeah. Well, you can't see it from my current camera perspective, but as my arm points, I've got a pair of Mackie SRM 450 powered loudspeakers. I picked one of the loudspeakers up a couple of years ago and I heard something rattling around in it. It turns out that I had one or more mouses in my house, and they were taking dry dog food out of my dog's bowl, and they were taking it back into the port of the loudspeaker and living in my loudspeaker while chomping on dog food. It was not an easy speaker to disassemble. I don't think I have all the dog food out of it yet, but yeah, that's an absolutely true thing to look out for. Is rodents. Just like rodents will get into the electrics of your car or a motorcycle when they decide to nest, and they can do a lot of damage. They can certainly do damage.
Or your air conditioner.
Or your air conditioner. Now, if your device is unplugged, chances are you don't have to worry about a mouse electrocuting itself inside your device. But if it's operable, I don't know if they're smart enough to avoid big capacitors.
How about your network, Jay?
Well, yeah, I got a couple of more slides. Is my slide still visible?
Nope.
Okay.
No, I stopped it while we were in discussion.
I got it. Thank you. Okay, so your computer network. We've talked an awful lot about networks, because without a network, there is no hybrid to the connected UC Zoom world or streaming world. So, when you come back in, are you connected? Do you have connectivity to the internet? Do you have connectivity between the devices in your sanctuary that need to talk to each other? Do you have Wi-Fi? Check your network speed. Are you getting the speed and connectivity that you're paying for from your internet service provider? These are all pretty basic things you're going to need to have working when you come back into Sanctuary. Anything to add to that?
Only that you'll have additional needs when ramping up to do video and streaming that you didn't have before. And that's worth sitting down and having a planning session with your IT people, whether that be in-house or a contractor. That's something you really want to pay attention to. You don't want to remember that you can do a test in an empty sanctuary and have it work great. But when that room fills up with a whole bunch of people and their cell phones,
Everybody connected at once.
everybody's connected.
Yeah.
It won't necessarily work the same way.
So in the same way, I've been involved in putting AV in a lot of stadiums, in arenas and places like that. So before those places open, there's a plumbing test where they make sure that there are people in every restroom in the stadium, and they get a command to start flushing, so that they validate the plumbing. Maybe you want to do that and have a network party to make sure everybody connected doesn't knock down your network speed.
That's a great idea.
No flushing required. Control system.
How do you check your Wi-Fi when you're in your space, Jay? Do you just do an up and down test?
Well,
like
you can certainly connect your, if it's just you, a single computer, you can connect, I use a speed test just to check that I've got the, bandwidth up and down. There are plenty of apps for network Wi-Fi analyzers that you can use. You can walk around, you can do a survey of your Wi-Fi coverage. So to your point, how would you check it to see if having multiple people connected at once would affect your coverage? I mean, you could get some anticipated number of people to come in with their phones. They could connect to Wi-Fi. They could all simultaneously download or upload something, or start a FaceTime or a Zoom where they're using that network capacity to convey data back and forth from their devices to some far end point. So did I jump ahead? And so that was that. Control systems. I'm going to ask our resident control expert, Mr. Mark, to weigh in on, what kind of things you would want to know if people walked in their sanctuary after coming back from a year to test out.
Yeah, I'd say whatever you do with the rest of the electronics kind of applies here. If you're using control panels or keypads, poke all the buttons, exercise them, make sure the functions that used to work still do. If you have, I mentioned it earlier, if you have wireless touch panels, those are the ones where you need to check the batteries, make sure the case isn't swelling on the backside, things like that. Again, most of the control systems these days rely on the network, so check the network, check the network.
If the network's good and these devices talk back to the controller, and then the controller has to talk to the devices that are under control, right? So
correct.
When you go to your touch panel to turn on a projector, your touch panel's communicating with the controller's communicating with the projector. So all those pieces have to work back and forth. And if they don't, you will not get the expected result.
Michael Fraley had earlier posted a comment about the BIOS in the audio consoles. If the thing's been shut off for a long time, who knows whether or not that BIOS, that little CMOS battery, is still working. It's the same in any electronic system.
I have that coming up on the computer part of it, but yes.
I'll back away from that.
Yes, that's a really good point, and
yeah. But that does apply to the control systems as well.
Anything that's basically a computer and has some things require on a battery for timing. Right, so that there's an internal clock, and if that battery goes, the clock goes, and if the clock goes, you're going to get a message, probably when you power the device on, But the other thing, it may not function when it doesn't know what time it is. Some things can just bark, or they will not stop bothering you to replace the battery while they're operating and doing other things. You may have a replace battery message come up underneath, something you really need to control and get to make things work. Media playback and recording. I mean, we're probably, I don't think anybody's using much mechanical playback, but maybe some of us are. If you're using Blu-ray or DVD, in your system, you're going to want to check that. You're going to want to clean it. I don't know if anybody's still using any kind of tape. I mean, I think most of us are beyond cassette and DAT and mini disc and all those things, but some of us may not be. You might be doing things like maybe you're doing CD duplication. I don't know. There's a lot of technologies that may still be out there, and some are still being used. So if you have anything mechanical, you're going to want to check that. You're going to want to check media. If you're recording audio, you may be recording to computer and hard disk. Maybe you have a multi-track audio recorder that's hard disk based. You're going to want to check it. You're going to want to test it. You're going to make sure that you can record, that you can play back. If you have, check your media as well. If you're using Flash, etc., make sure that that your media is good. Again, is it likely that something happened to it? Probably not really, but static electricity can take things out. It's conceivable you could have endured a lightning hit, while you've been away for a year, and you may come back and find that you have had some electronics damaged by lightning. Again, that's part and parcel to getting back in early enough so that if you find something that is damaged to the point where you're going to have to go get somebody to repair it or evaluate it, that you have enough time to have that done, get the equipment back in place, program it, test it before you actually have to go and do a service. So make sure that you don't screw yourself because by the time you found out something was wrong, it was too late to do something about it. Ancillary systems in your facility, audio and video to remote locations. So perhaps you have a nursery that has a video feed and an audio feed, so that the folks that are volunteering in the nursery, they can hear or see the service. Or maybe you have a catering kitchen or a cry room or a chapel, some other location within your building that's going to get an audio or video feed. Check those things. Make sure that those are functional when you come back. Ceiling speakers, video displays, etc. Make sure they work. Maybe you're using a digital signage player that is updating screens so that when people walk in, they know what events are happening in the building and where they are, and it runs on a scheduler, and that's going to change on the day of the week depending on what's happening in the building and time. Make sure all those things are operable. Again, those are things that people are going to need for informational use, and they're electronic. They're often network connected. You want to make sure all that works. Other ancillary things. So we talked about remote controls, batteries, chargers, hearing assistance receivers. You're going to want to make sure that all those work. Make sure the earpieces, if there are accessory earbuds, that those are all in good shape, that cables are in good shape, that if there are foam covers on anything, that they're not deteriorated, you have time to replace them if they're field replaceable. Things like laser pointers, slide advances, make sure those things are operable, they've got fresh batteries and they're ready to go when somebody has to go grab them for a service. Projector screen shades. So we've got a roll-up projection screen in my sanctuary. It's controlled by a dedicated, two dedicated, I think, remote controls. They're controlled by the Crestron control system. You want to make sure everything operates up and down from every location. It needs to be operable. Check the screen. Is it clean? Is there mold on it? Does it stick? Does it roll up and down smoothly? When it rolls down, does it stop at its target limit? The same thing when it goes up. If you have any mechanical, electrically operable shades in your sanctuary that are going to shutter windows so that you're keeping sunlight out and being able to get a high contrast and brightness on your projection screen, make sure those go up and down and those are operable as anticipated. So those are things I would also look at that are not necessarily the screen is AV gear, but shades are technically not AV. They're there to facilitate that functionality. Make sure it works when you come back in. And then we get to computer equipment. So, again, you're going to want to make sure things are clean. Screens, keyboards, if you have any media slots. Make sure your computer operating systems are up to date and you have the security patches you need, right? That's if you're going to use streaming, Zoom or whatever you're using, make sure you've got that software up to date. We talked about internal batteries and keeping time. Computers have batteries on motherboards. Some are typically they're hearing aid batteries that you can open up and you can replace. There's some electronic devices you may own. I've got my mixing console, audio workstation. One of the ones I have, the battery is actually on an IC, and in order to replace that battery, that's got to be desoldered, and it's surface mount equipment. It needs special hot air soldering iron to pull that out. So, when you go in, make sure all these things work. If you've got an uninterruptible power supply that backs up your control system, your audio DSP, or your mixing console, your computer, make sure that your computer battery, that UPS battery, test that. If the battery's bad and power goes out, your device is going to go off because there's no battery storage to keep it up. So check that out. And that is the end of the PowerPoint by death return to the sanctuary. And at this point, I'll stop sharing.
In terms of computer updates, software updates, operating system updates, how many have we had in the last year, like Windows updates?
So Windows updates, we've had 2 major updates on top of Windows 10 in the last year. On Mac, we've had 2, including Big Sur, which is a complete and utter replacement of everything that the Mac has. So everything's on there. On the Behringer consoles, there were major updates on every single one of the range in the last year. On literally every single thing since from a year ago to today, there has been a major update on virtually every single thing. And from my perspective, I would say this is actually a really, really good time to do all the updates before you start. If you're going to start, you might as well have the crashes at the beginning and get yourself into the new environment, get everything over to the new stuff, which sounds alien in a way because you think, well, let's get running. You're just putting off an inevitable issue. So it's probably better to get every single thing updated first before you start trying to do anything.
And you also mentioned firmware updates for specific pieces of equipment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean some firmware updates on on AV devices may incorporate major functional or feature improvements in addition to bug fixes, and that could apply. Now, I'd be cautious about just going off and updating firmware just because there's something late and great without reading through things like release notes to understand what changes. So, for example, you could update firmware in some device and now your control system may not control it properly. Mark, would you like to address that topic?
We make a lot of money off of our end users deciding to update their video codecs. Some of the manufacturers are not real good about keeping the API stable from one firmware revision to the next.
Could you define the API for folks who don't know?
API is the programming interface, so how the control system talks to the device. And so let's say you've got a video codec, for doing video conferencing. Both of the major manufacturers in the past have released firmware updates. The IT department says, oh, we're going to be really, forward thinking here and we're going to update it. And we get a phone call saying, your control system is terrible. It doesn't talk anymore. And it's like, did you do an update to the codec? Well, yeah. Okay. Well, it'll be this much money for us to fix that for you. Because we have to, find new modules, go through the testing process, all of that. So as Jay mentioned, updating one thing could stop other things from talking to it. The general wisdom we put out there is If it's not broken, don't fix it. And that applies to firmware updates. Don't just offhand say, there's a new firmware update, I need to put it in. You don't necessarily need to put it in. Read those release notes.
Yes, read the release notes, because there may be instances where you really do need to update the firmware, because that firmware fixes something that you haven't run into yet that might be a showstopper for how that equipment operates.
Correct.
And the company I work for, we build digital signal processing and other things, and we update firmware pretty often. And we have very thorough release notes that we post whenever we make a firmware update. And often, so because we have software that programs our devices and we have firmware that operates our devices, firmware and software have to be in sync with each other. So if you've updated firmware and and you haven't updated the software, again, you may find yourself coming across anomalies that throw a monkey wrench in how things work. It's better. It's best to check first before you do it, than find yourself having to call somebody to find out how to roll firmware back to an older version, so that you can make things work again. Sometimes that's easy to do. Sometimes that's hard to do. It depends on the programming, the device, the firmware, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Good advice.
While I would agree with that in a lot of areas, I would also say that, particularly on PCs and in certain areas, you are better to get this done, because you're stacking up a problem that if you don't do a lot of the problems I see is when they've not done it, and then you end up being completely out of date, and that causes you a bigger. Normally, there's a lot of online stuff that doesn't want you to be out of date anymore, because they just can't support it.
Well, I mean, particularly computers and operating systems where you've updated an OS and now find that the software that you bought doesn't work. Now you have to pay for a software upgrade to work with new OS. I mean, I think everybody who owns a computer and software has run into that at some point in time. And you may decide, maybe the new OS is really great and will give you new functionality, but now do I really want to go out and lay out $500 or $1,000 to replace applications or update applications that worked or would continue to work if I hadn't updated the operating system? And that's always a case by case, Crystal.
I was going to say the important thing to me is the balance between security and usefulness. You've got to check your patch notes, your update notes for security. Like, perfect case in point, right now there's a system that integrates to OBS called Lumia, and it works with this series of lights that have been very heavy in use on Twitch, called Yi lights. And Yi just did a firmware push and completely cut Lumia support. Most of Twitch is going nuts right now because they've just lost all these lights they've spent a lot of money on.
Bummer.
Yeah, so and it's because nobody paid attention to the patch notes and they pushed firmware. So pay attention to whether you're updating for security or just an aspect of some program you're not going to use, like whether or not it changes colors on the fly in an app. These are things you want to pay attention to. Another thing I wanted to point out with regards to batteries and what have you, because I didn't hear it mentioned specifically, but if you're using any kind of a wireless peripheral for your PC, like Bluetooth, mice, etc., make sure you check that. And one other thing, with regard to PCs specifically, but I would say overall systems, computers, make sure, yes, you can probably run on a computer, no problem. Make sure you have a backup computer, because right now GPUs and CPUs are incredibly expensive. And this is not something you want to be going, it's 11th hour, the computer crashed, what do I do? I gotta go buy another one, because you're gonna pay through the nose for it. They are extremely expensive right now.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
All right, so that was pretty deep. Thank you, Jay, for that. Much appreciated. Before we move on to the next topic, there's something that I neglected to do I just shifted it, which is panel introductions. Who are these people that are talking to you? So let's do that now. We'll take a little trip down introduction lane. So we'll start off with Joanna Lovell, who is known as J-Lo to us here. And she's a technology specialist that's worked in the AV integration space. She's a content creator, a choir director, music minister, audio engineer, and our general guru. She works with churches up and down the East Coast, and she also created the Dreaming Tree Coffee House. And I'll let her introduce everybody else.
It's kind of funny, Marty, because I cut everybody's intro to about 1 to 2 sentences. So I chose the sentences. That's all I'm going to say. David O'Connor is from the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, PA, where he is the tech team coordinator. Mark Plukas is the operations manager for an independent AV control systems programming company. Mark is also the technical director of Circle of Friends Coffee House. Jay Paul is an AV support volunteer for the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Columbia, Maryland, as well as audio engineer for the UUCC One World Coffee House. Crystal currently is the technical consultant for the UU Church of Jacksonville, Florida, where she's assisting her congregation with transitioning to hybrid worship. Leo Mendel also advises synagogues on how to set up for live streaming of services and has produced over 70 live events in the last year for Jewish organizations around the world. And our dear host, Marty Atias, is currently a consultant, a system design, and an integration engineer, a sound mixer and editor, and a digital-first conferencing consultant. He's also a Unitarian Universalist.
All right. And today is a very special day because one of our panelists, David O'Connor, has a birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday, David.
And we're going to do something special. We're going to do a little experiment, and all of you can participate. I've allowed everybody to unmute their microphones, as you wish. And Joanna is going to lead us through a...
Wait. Hang on. I need a second. Hang on. I got to pull up the music. Okay.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear David. Happy birthday to you.
So now concludes our demonstration of why congregational singing doesn't work over Zoom. For more instruction on this, please feel free to tune in again for the next birthday.
How do you spell latency?
Oh no, everyone was perfectly together. I was done like 40 seconds before you guys were done.
All right. At this point, I'm going to mute everybody, and panelists, go ahead and unmute your microphones. Well, I'll start.
Thank you. Well, happy birthday, David.
All right. Happy birthday. All right.
Thank you.
So moving into our next topic, we're going to start talking about sound in a little bit of depth. So we're going to do sound 102. We did sound 101 a couple of weeks ago, where we looked at the very basic signal flow of an entire basic sound system, which is microphone, mixer, amplifier, and loudspeaker. Can't get any more basic than that, right? Well, today we're going to look at the mixer. You know, what sound goes in one end, comes out the other end, and what happens in the middle. So let's take a look at that. And so
How
what we're
does
going
the
to
signal flow?
how do it flow? Let it flow. Okay, so where's my controls? Here we are. All right, so we all have different size congregations, different size sound systems. Some are really old sound systems, some are brand new systems. So we're going to take this from the beginning. You may have a very small basic mixer like this. You may have a slightly larger one that looks like this. You may have a powered mixer that looks like this. They're all basically the same thing. They do exactly the same thing. Some of them do them in slightly different ways, and we're going to take a look at that now. You may have a digital mixer that looks something like this. Now, these work in a very different way, and they may look intimidating to some people, but the basic functionalities are exactly the same. And so let's look at a very typical basic mixer and we'll look at the signal flow and see exactly what happens. And
Marty, did you want the graphic that I have here?
yes, please, Mark. Thank you very much. Basic signal flow in any mixer. The very, very first thing that happens after the input connector is called the gain stage or the preamp stage or the trim, depending on how your knob is labeled. And it's generally the very first thing that you'll see up at the top of the input strip. Now, this particular mixer that we're looking at has, 12 inputs? 16, 18, and it's called 18 inputs. And every one of these vertical strips from 1 to 18 or 1 to 16 are almost identical. 1 to 8 are exactly identical. And so we're going to go through one and all the others will be the same. Well, that's true. There are some differences in this one. But let's go through strip number 1. The input gain is the most critical setting in the signal chain. This amplifies the very, very low voltage signal coming from a microphone to a voltage signal that is actually usable throughout the rest of the mixer and even at the output of the mixer. And you'll see why in a moment. And we'll go down to the next item, which is the low cut filter. When you have an open microphone on a stage with other musicians, you may have bass guitar, you may have drums, percussion instruments that produce low frequency signals. You don't want these coming into a vocal microphone. There are other sounds that can be ambient in the room, like from air conditioning, a low rumble, or a heavy truck that drives down the street outside your sanctuary produces a low rumble in the room. This frequency of information is completely inconsequential to vocal microphones because people can't generate sounds that low in frequency. And you don't want to record these things because it just clutters up the track and you just have to remove them later. So this low cut button takes out everything that's below a certain frequency. Typically that could be 75 hertz or 100 hertz or even higher. When I have microphones on the stage, everything except the bass guitar and the kick drum generally has this button pressed in for low cut. Unless an instrument can produce sounds that are lower than this frequency, there's no reason to capture those frequencies. The next item is a fairly unique one to this board, and it's called high Z. Not something you would typically use at a mixer in a church. And what it is it converts one of the inputs to something that's suitable for an electric instrument, like a guitar. Guitars have a high impedance, need a high impedance input, whereas standard audio equipment uses a low impedance input. So, and you'll see that only appears on the first 2 channels.
It's becoming a very common feature in the lower cost mixers that might be used by a band or a singer-songwriter. You'll see 1 or 2 high Z inputs so that they can plug in their instruments, and then they'll plug in their microphones on higher channels.
Yeah, if you're going to plug your instrument directly into the mixing board, you'd want to use this feature.
Right.
Okay, let's move down to the next one. And this is EQ. So some mixers will have 3-band EQ. Some mixers will have more than 3 bands. So if you think about the frequency spectrum from low frequencies to high frequencies, we can break that up into different bands. And like a tone control, right? You have a low frequency control, a mid frequency control, and a high frequency control. And so you can tailor your sound in each of those frequency bands by having more or less information in that band. Now, this particular console for the mid-frequency control has not only a volume control, but it also has a frequency control. So where low frequencies will be able to boost or cut everything in that band, the high frequencies will be able to boost and cut everything in that band. The mid frequencies allow you to select or sweep between the low frequency limit and the high frequency limit within that mid band, which gives you the ability to tailor the sound that you're looking for. Because there's a lot of information that happens in the mid-frequency band. Vocal intelligibility is in the mid-frequency band. Guitar intonation is in the mid-frequency band. There's a lot of stuff. So just having one booster or cut control for that entire band is really too broad. So this frequency control allows you to zero in on parts of that band that are important to this particular channel, right? And so that's the EQ for this channel, and you can adjust equalization for each channel individually, depending on whether it's an instrument or a vocal, right? And then as we move down the signal...
Pausing for a moment. Rob asked a question, if you are using a vocal mic, do you still need to use that low cut button? Won't the mic not pick up the low frequencies? Actually, a vocal microphone will pick up all frequencies. It's just that microphones that have been labeled as a vocal microphone usually has more to do with whether or not there's isolation for handling, and whether or not there's a sweet spot in the mids or upper mids that make vocals stand out a little bit more. But yes, you would still want to turn on the low cut filter in most vocal applications. If you have someone with a particularly low voice, you might actually want to turn it off, but again, with a particularly low voice. Otherwise, it's handy to have it engaged, especially if they're handling the microphone. It cuts out a lot of the thumping that you hear when you're handling the microphone.
Short of Melvin from the Temptations, R.I.P.
Very white.
There aren't very many people where you would
Right.
necessarily, and keep in mind those high pass filters, the low cut, probably on small mixers, they're anywhere from like 80 to 100 hertz, maybe 125. You're still not, you could still use that on a bass singer without any ill effect.
Yeah.
Right.
Those low pass filter, high pass filters / low cut are also handy in windy circumstances, because the wind blowing across the windscreen usually has a very loud low frequency component, and you can use that to get rid of that, or at least partially get rid of it.
Now, have you guys ever used a vocal microphone for something other than vocals?
All the time.
Yep.
You ever used it on a bass amp?
All the time.
Right? So yes, those microphones are perfectly capable of picking up those frequencies. So it's more a matter of what you're using the microphone on or for at that particular time, whether you want to have that low cut filter engaged in the mixer. Now, having said that, some microphones will have a low cut filter built into the microphone, and there will be a switch embedded in the body of the microphone. There could be more than one switch. The microphones have a low cut filter switch. Some of them have a high boost filter switch, and some of them have an attenuation switch that will drop the output level of the microphone by, say, 10 dB if you happen to be using it on a loud instrument, so that you're not overdriving the input to your console. So you can use different combinations of things. And when you're talking about filtering out sounds, the best place to do it is at the earliest possible convenience, the early possible point in the signal chain, which would be at the microphone itself, if that option's available. Now, when we go back to looking at our mixer, we've got the preamp the low-cut filter, and then the equalization. The next section is the auxiliary sends. Now, I point that out because the auxiliary sends come after the equalization section. On this particular console, what that means is that any EQ you do that produces the kind of sound that you want in your loudspeakers, that EQ will also affect the sound that goes through your auxiliary mixes. And it's just something to be aware of. On some consoles, you have the ability to select whether the aux sends come before the EQ or after the EQ. And depending on what you're trying to do with it, you may choose one or the other. And we'll look at that again in a moment. So auxiliary sends.
Mark, any chance you could zoom in a little on the image so we can read some of the fine print on the board?
It's not letting me blow this up much further. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, and Marty, I just want to just make sure that it's clear the physical location, of where a control knob or switch on the console is not an indicator of where it is in the electrical circuit. So, for example, the EQ is above the auxiliary send, which it does not portend that the EQ is electrically always in the circuit before an auxiliary send. So, we're just looking at the physical locations just to make sure, and that generally speaking, in smaller, less expensive mixers, where that auxiliary send picks up its signal source is fixed. You can't change it. So, something that is called an echo send would probably almost always follow the channel fader, where something called a foldback or monitor send would almost always be before the fader and possibly after the EQ, but sometimes before as well.
And that's a good point. It all depends on the particular design of that mixer. And we're going to look at some documentation that will allow you to determine exactly what your signal flow is as soon as we get through this next section. But for this particular board, and in a lot of cases, it's been my experience anyway, that the physical location does indicate where it is electrically in the signal, although some mixers have a switch that allows you to change it, as I was saying. And again, we'll look at that. So this particular board, and I'm squinting to look at it.
All right, I can read them off. The top green knob is monitor 1.
Uh-huh.
The second green knob is labeled monitor 2. The third green knob is labeled FX.
Okay, great. Thank you. That explains a lot. So an aux send can be labeled send 1, send 2. It can be labeled monitor 1, monitor 2, or it can be labeled FX 1 or 2. And aux send and monitor send are generally the same thing, and they are allow you to create a separate mix from the mix that goes out of the faders that go to your main outputs to your loudspeakers. So you have that. Your faders are your main mix. They go out to your loudspeakers. These allow you to create a separate mix that you may use for floor monitors for the musicians so that they can hear specific things that may not be the same thing as the audience is hearing. This would also be the place where you would do your broadcast mix, because it is also not the same mix that is coming out of the loudspeakers. And this particular board now has 2 aux sends that are called monitor 1, monitor 2, and they will be mixing before the fader, which is what we call pre-fader. And so what that means is that you can make changes to the faders for the mix that goes to your loudspeakers that will not affect the mix you're doing on your aux sends. And vice versa. Anything you do in the aux send mix will not affect the signal that goes to the faders and comes out of your loudspeakers. This is an important concept because you're mixing for two different audiences. The audience that's in the room and the audience that's listening at home, which can also be your recording mix. It's also the mix that you would send to your listening assistant system. It would also be the mix that you're sending to an overflow room. And the reason that those mixes are different is because when you're sitting in the sanctuary with the band, you're hearing a lot of music and acoustic energy that's coming from the band on the stage. And things like drums or a grand piano or percussion instruments, you don't necessarily need to amplify in the room unless you have a huge space. If you're not amplifying in the room, you may not even need to mic them and bring them into the mixer unless you have people who are not in the room who need to hear those instruments. And so you do have to mic them. You do need to bring them into the mixer. And then you can bring them out to your recording, your overflow room, and your broadcast.
Marty,
Go ahead.
there was a question in the box about how you control the volume of that aux mix send.
Well, each one of the inputs has its own knob that is the equivalent of a fader, except that it's round. And that determines the level of that signal into your aux mix. So just like you're mixing on the faders for your speakers, each of the knobs in that row called monitor 1 or monitor 2 or send 1 or send 2 is the mix level for that channel.
Yeah. And I know this is going to be a big question too, is how do you monitor that mix? I know if you
That's a
plugged your
very
headphone
good
in,
question.
go
It's a
right
very
ahead.
good question, and I'll address that in a moment.
Sure.
All right, when we get to the output sections. Now, this board, the third mix on this board, aux mix, is called FX. And that's kind of a different thing. And the difference is that this particular board has an effects module on it that allows you to add reverb or delay or some other effect. And the position of this send is different. With the first two, I said these are before the fader. Effects mix become after the fader. So any changes that you make in the linear fader are reflected in the effects send level. And so this is a very unique case, something that you may not use, probably not use for a broadcast send. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. And that's something we can discuss at another time, because that's a strategic thing in setting up your mix.
That's actually a topic that I had intended, if people were interested in learning more about this kind of mixing, I was going to offer either a daytime or evening course separate from this on how to think about various things you might want to do with your console.
Mixing strategy is a really important thing to explore, to understand, and to talk with someone who's experienced about it and how it relates to your particular situation. That's a great topic for a special session. Going back to the mixer, we've got the preamp, the low cut filter, the equalizer, the aux sends, and the next one is the pan control, sometimes called a balance control. So what this does is takes the output of the fader at whatever level it is and pans it between the left channel and the right channel. Now remember, because this is the fader signal, that this is going to your loudspeakers. And so you have the ability to do a stereo mix for your loudspeakers. Whether that's a good idea or not depends on a number of things, like where your loudspeakers are, how your loudspeakers are connected, if they're connected in stereo, not all are, the shape and acoustics of your sanctuary. Sometimes you'll have people that are sitting outside of the speakers to the left and right edges of the room. And if you're doing a stereo mix, they will only be able to hear the nearest loudspeaker to them. They will not be able to hear the loudspeaker on the other side of the room, in which case a stereo mix is probably not a good idea. But that's what this knob does.
Now, another part of the course that I'm offering will show you creative use of the pan control. For example, our sanctuary, anything that's coming out of the left channel goes to the sanctuary. Anything that's coming out of the right channel goes to the lobby and the kitchen, places like that. So you can use the pan control to determine how much of the signal is reaching each one of those areas by just panning left and right. Naturally, straight up is they both get an equal amount of that signal. It's also, if you have a lesser capable console, a clever way to create a broadcast mix separate from your sanctuary mix by using that pan control. Anything that you don't want amplified in the room, well, pan it all the way over to one side. It's only hitting the broadcast mix. Anything that you don't want to send down the broadcast mix, pan it all the way to the other side. It only goes into the room. There's little tricks like that you can play. Beauty of a console, of most consoles, is they're very flexible. It's really dependent on your creativity level, because all of these buses just take audio someplace, and this is letting you put the audio where you want to. That's all it's really doing.
That's right. If you're not doing stereo mix, you have your left channel, your right channel are essentially two separate channels.
Right. Two
and
separate
the pan
mixes.
controls allows you to send to one or the other, or a mix of both. It's a very creative use. Thanks, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
But what if you want to do a stereo broadcast mix, right? This pan control has nothing to do with the aux sends, which would be used for your broadcast mix, or could be used for your broadcast mix. To do that gets a little bit tricky on a board like this. You would use your aux 1 for left channel and aux 2 for your right channel. I hope that's right on your side. Can't tell. And then you would turn up aux 1 and aux 2 depending on where you want that channel to sit between left and right. If they're both straight up, then it's centered. If you have aux 1 turned up a little bit more than aux 2, then your signal will be on slightly to the right channel. No, slightly to the left channel, because you have more of aux 1 than you have of aux 2.
And if you're going to play that game, get a good night's sleep before you try and mix that way.
Yeah. Yes, it's something that takes practice. It takes practice, absolutely. It's easier on some other boards, particularly on digital boards.
Absolutely.
Right? But for a board like this, it's possible it can get tricky. But now, what if you have a floor monitor, right? Which is a monitor that sits on the floor, on the stage, in front of your musicians, so that your musicians can hear each other. If you have a large stage and you have 3 or 4 or 5 musicians spread out across the stage, they can't hear each other. And so you use floor monitors in front of each musician or each group of musicians, so that the people on the right side of the stage can hear the people on the left side of the stage, and so they can hear each other. Vocalists perform best when they can hear themselves. And if you don't have a floor monitor, just the reverb in the room splashing back onto the stage, they really can't hear what they're doing. That's why you see some singers do this. They'll press the pin of their ear against each other so that they can hear themselves in their own head, right? But it doesn't look very good, and it doesn't sound very good either, frankly. So the practice of using floor monitors is a really good idea. Where does that floor monitor get its signal from the console? From an aux send, right? So that's another use of an aux send, and you really want to be sure that you have enough aux sends for all the different kinds of mixes that you need to do in addition to your loudspeakers. And I'll show that again in a graphic. So now if we go over to the center part of this particular console, you'll see that from channel 9, it says 9/10, 11/12, 13/14, 15/16, 17/18. The reason for that is that these particular channels are stereo channels, whereas 1 to 8 have only one input, and these are where your mic preamps are. The rest of the channels probably don't have mic preamps. They will have 2 line level inputs for stereo. So each single channel carries both left and right for, say, tape playback, stereo keyboards, anything like that. And they can mix into what you're doing in the same ways. They have aux sends, they have pan controls, they have effects sends, they have limited EQ, because they don't generally need all of the EQ that a microphone would typically use. So this one doesn't have the sweepable mids, but it has low, mid, and high level controls.
You'll find that on most of the lesser expensive consoles that do exactly this, they kind of be everything to everybody. There'll be a certain number of mic channels and a certain number of stereo or dual channels. The stereo/dual channels will try to look more like your home hi-fi, where you'll get a bass, mid-range, treble controls, and they might even, they don't do it on this console, but they might even rename the pan control to balance. I think the Mackeys do that, rather the Behringers, I think, do that. Do the Soundcrafts do it? That's a Soundcraft right there. I don't know that they do it. No. But they do something very similar. You'll notice that on this one, when you get up near the top there, they're giving you 3 buttons for, they eliminate the sweepable mid and give you a fixed mid.
All right. So let's go back to that mixer, because I want to finish this off.
Yep.
Below the pan control, there are 2 buttons, one called mute and one called solo. Mute is like your on and off switch for that channel, right? If a microphone's not being used at any given time, you want to mute it out, you want to shut it off. You don't want it contributing room noise to your mix. So any microphone that's not being used gets muted. That's just a general practice in every case. Solo, if you're wearing headphones, if you have headphones available, and you should have headphones that completely surround the ear so it blocks out the room sound. Solo is the way that you can listen to a single channel for troubleshooting, for equalization, or for many other purposes. And it only goes to your headphones, not to your loudspeakers. And so in the middle of a performance, if something doesn't sound quite right, if you hear a buzz, if you don't hear something that you think you should, you can take that channel, put it into solo, and take a really close listen to it in your headphones, isolated from everything else. The other thing that solo does, if we look over at the right side of the board to where the meters are, so right there. So these are your mix output meters. And in a normal mode, this is the output level of your mix. When you take a channel into solo, generally speaking, different boards do this different ways. Now you're metering just that one channel. And this is a really good way to determine what the preamp level is. That's that very first knob at the top of every input strip. How do you determine what that volume should be? Well, the answer is you put that channel into solo so that it's the only thing going to the meters, and you adjust it so that the sound volume is the highest level that you see, the peaks are touching into the, just touching into the yellow part. Those meters have mostly green, then a few yellow LEDs, and then the very top one is red, which means clipping. You never want to touch that red meter. So
No.
that range that's just below, that's yellow and below, like that range of like 4 or 5 LEDs, that's your normal range. And that's where generally you want to have all of the individual inputs sitting on their own. And then you do mix controls on your faders and your aux sends. So that's a really, really good thing to know about the solo button, is that it determines your metering.
The other thing that's going on this one is the solo button in this mains block has 2 positions. Up is AFL, down is PFL. AFL is after fade listen. PFL is pre-fade listen. So if you're trying to set the gain with the trim up here on a particular channel, you would make sure that you put the solo into pre-fade listen mode. That means whatever you're listening to is before you're hitting the fader that we haven't talked about yet, which is what's doing your mix. Some consoles actually call the solo button PFL. They don't even give you a thing called solo. They call it a pre-fade listen.
Right.
Jay, I believe that's true. The Soundcrafts, you're familiar? Yeah, Soundcrafts, it's called PFL. There is no solo. I can't hear you, Jay.
In the box. There's a question in the box that
PFL and AFL.
Yeah, I see a PFL button on the Soundcraft. I don't see an
And
AFL.
on a lot of digital consoles, you can select where that actually picks signal up.
And we're going to get to Kermit's question in just a moment. I have a slide for that. So at this point, let me take the screen back.
The signal hasn't even gotten out of the console yet.
I know, right?
It's a long signal flow.
Hasn't even gotten onto the bus yet.
That's right. It's still in that channel strip.
Either you're on the bus or you're off the bus.
David,
Well, actually, you can be both.
You can be both, yeah, depending on the bus you're talking about.
Simultaneously.
All right. So it's really handy when, we talked about how different mixers operate different ways, and you really need to refer to the documentation to determine how your mixer works. And every document, every user guide will have some sort of a block diagram that shows you the exact signal flow, the electrical signal flow, in very easy to understand terms. And, the first time you look at it, what is this? And so I want to explain this to everybody so that it's easier for you to understand. And let me do this.
I saw your mouse, but it was super small.
Do you have a highlighter mode?
Yeah, here we go.
There you go.
All right. So here's your mic input, and here's a line input. Now that would be a 1/4 inch input, and this would be an XLR. And so you have that choice. And they go to this is your preamp. This is where the gain stage, the trim, the preamp, the gain stage is. And there's that volume control for that. And they'll control the volume for either input. You would only use one. You will not ever use both at the same time. After that, there might be another 1/4 inch jack called an insert point. And we're not going to get really into this, but this is where you might go to an external piece of equipment for processing. You might also take it out if you need to take this particular signal out of the board to some other piece of equipment that is not affected by anything else in the signal chain. This would be a place to do it.
Or
We'll also cover inserts and direct outs on consoles in the little audio console course.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be a good thing to do. So you'll see where this switch here is connected. So this generally just goes to here, and then you have your equalizer, and you'll have something called a direct output, which is basically the same thing as an insert, but whereas this can feed audio back in, this is just an output. So input, preamp, equalizer, channel fader, the pan fader that goes to your left bus and your right bus. So this is a left side of your main mix. This is the right side of your main mix. Now these vertical lines will go up and down the schematic diagram because there will be many of these inputs, and they'll all stack up above each other, and they will all connect to these buses just like this. So left main bus, right main bus. This is your aux send, that is post fader. This is your aux send, that is pre-fader. And those are your inputs to your buses. On the right side of the buses, you'll have your output section. So from the left and right main bus, you have your main fader and then your main outputs. Pretty easy, right? You have your post fader aux send going out to an output, your pre-fader aux send going out to an output. Now, let's go way back over here to the preamp, and you'll see there's this other line that goes to a pre-fader aux send. And so that is before the equalizer, before the channel fader, before the pan fader, and obviously before the post fader send. So that's how it's off. That's how it splits off early and goes to your pre-fader aux bus. Right? So this is a very basic channel diagram. Now, you can get, when you look at a more elaborate board, it might look something like this, right? But when you take a look at each channel, you'll see something that's very familiar now. You'll see your input, your gain trim. Moving through the insert point, you'll see your low-cut filter. You'll see your pre-fader aux send, which is the line that drops down. You'll see your equalizer. You'll see your fader.
I lost your highlighter, Marty.
Yeah, I can't show it while I'm zoomed
Okay.
in.
Sorry.
Then you'll see the mute button. Then you'll see the pan fader, the pan control, and then you'll see all your buses. Now this board has many more buses than the one we looked at earlier. But if you just follow the lines and follow the dots to where they connect to each bus, you can follow the signal flow. Now on the left side of the buses are all of your inputs. So you see channels 1 to 16 are identical, so they only show one. But down below you see channels 17 to 20, which are the stereo inputs that we talked about earlier. You notice they don't have a mic input, but they have 2 line level inputs. And they go over to the buses, and on the right side of the buses are your outputs. So each of the buses will connect to something on the right side, which goes to your output sections. So there'll be, this one has a 9-band EQ, which is that gray box there. It has various ways to get in and out of it, or go around it, or put it in the circuit, or take it out of the circuit. There are insert points. There's a CD tape input and output up at the top in the center there. So you may have a bunch of inputs and outputs on the board, on the back panel of your board. And if you want to know where they are exactly in the electrical signal flow, are those CD tape inputs before or after the output EQ? Do you want to know? This is where you can find out.
The obvious useful pieces of being able to read a diagram like this are, one, planning where you're going to make your connections for various uses, and two, when you're trying to do something and it's not working right, how come I'm not getting what I wanted to hear out of that output? You can follow the signal flow and figure out where the mistake is, or why you're not getting what it is you want.
Now, when you look at digital boards, the schematic diagram in a digital board will be completely different because we're dealing with digital circuits and DSP modules, and it probably won't show this kind of layout of diagram because it's not analog in fashion. Everything that we've been talking about so far are analog consoles.
Digital consoles, it's like trying to draw the internet. It all goes into a cloud, it all comes out of a cloud, and you fuss with it somewhere in the middle.
Right. But to make operations easier, a digital board may show you in graphical terms on its display the signal flow and show you which components go in which order. So in this case, you have this is 48 volt button, which we didn't talk about in the other boards. This provides phantom power to condenser microphones, and all boards will have this switch. A couple other things that we'll get into when we talk about mixers. This is a noise gate, which comes right after the preamp. This is your EQ. This is a compressor. You have your insert points, which can be moved, and you have your output. And then you have your bus sends. So this is just a different pictorial diagram of the signal flow of a mixer. So how do we connect all of these things up? Well, okay, we have some pretty basic inputs and outputs. We've already talked about some of them. Your main left and right output will go to your loudspeakers. Your aux output will go to your broadcast mix for Zoom, your Zoom computer. Another aux output will go to your floor monitors. And you'll want to be able to listen to Zoom, so you're taking an output from the computer and bringing it back into the mixer on one of these inputs. Now, it's interesting to note, and I mentioned this before, but I want to make sure that it was understood. This is your broadcast mix. This is the mix that everybody who is not in the room will listen to because they cannot hear the sound coming from the stage, right? So this will go to your overflow room. It will go to your hearing assistance system. It will go to your broadcast, your Zoom, your conferencing outputs. Any place. It'll also go to your recording if you're doing a mix recording of your service. This is the broadcast mix. Will have all of the components of everything that's going on that you will record, and it will also be properly balanced, we hope. Now, how do you listen to your aux output? Well, some consoles may give you the ability to solo your aux sends. Some mixers will not. If your mixer does not give you the ability to monitor or solo your aux send, then you have to add a headphone amplifier in this line. So you would interrupt this line, go into or you use a splitter, go into a headphone amplifier and have your volume control there for your headphones. There are
making
cases.
the distinction that the other headphone jack that's on the console is not monitoring the aux sends, it's monitoring the main output.
The main output or any of your inputs that you're going to solo, right? So while it may be tempting to do a broadcast mix on the same console that you're mixing the room, you'll be listening to that broadcast mix in headphones. Now, if your room is not loud, if your sound system is not loud, if you're not working with a loud band, that can work perfectly well. But if you are working in a loud room, headphones won't give you the kind of isolation that you need to make sure that you're listening just to the headphones and not to anything in the room, especially in low frequencies. If you have an electric bass guitar that you're amplifying through the speakers or drums, low frequencies can, even though you're wearing good headphones with a nice seal around your ears, that seal is not sufficient to isolate low frequency sounds. You will hear the room, and you won't be able to tell in your ears whether what you're hearing is coming from the headphones or coming from the room. So what you're actually sending out in your broadcast may not be what you think it is. So the better solution, the ideal, is to be in a different acoustic space, to be in a different room where you have headphones in a quiet space, or even better, loudspeakers set up in the room, so that you are actually hearing what you're sending to your computer and sending out on your broadcast. Really important thing if you're working in a loud room. If you're not working in a loud room and you're just working with speech or maybe music that's a singer and a guitarist, you can get away with it.
Marty, did you see Deborah's question about headphones in the
Yeah,
same space?
I haven't been able to see that screen.
Okay. So if I can ask that question now. Her AV desk is in the sanctuary among the seats, so that when not wearing headphones, we hear what the congregants in the room are hearing. What
Perfect.
kind of headphones are advisable for monitoring the broadcast mix for doing channels from this position? Closed back to shut out the room sound, or semi-open to avoid the frequency distortion? I've heard it might be a problem with closed back, or am I missing a good option? Any specific recommendations for a nice flat frequency response at low cost?
Well, yeah. Open back headphones and semi-open back headphones, they allow sound to come out. They also allow sound to come in. And if you're all by yourself in a room and you're listening for high fidelity, music enjoyment, that has some benefits. But if you're working in a PA situation with people around you, the sound that comes out can be heard by people sitting next to you, so that can be annoying. And the sound from the room can come in and confuse what you're hearing. So that's not a good situation. So whenever we're working in a live situation, we're always using closed back headphones with a cup that is large enough to completely surround your ears. Here's one example. So when I put these on, right, completely surrounding my ears, and in a quiet space like this, I can't hear anything but what comes out of the headphones. But when the loudspeakers are really rocking and the sound level goes up and people are clapping and cheering and really getting in the mood and the bass is pumping and thumping, this seal in here is just not going to cut it. But you do what you can. So specific recommendations, the Sony MVR, what is it, the 2506, 2509s, Audio Technicas, the AT50s, 50X series is also very good. There's a company called Sound Isolation. Let me go to my browser here and I can look up some specific recommendations.
Sennheiser HD 280 Pros are excellent.
Oh,
AKG
awesome.
makes good broadcast headphones as well. Anything that you see that broadcasters are typically using as their headphones are going to be a good choice. They do tend to be a little bit pricier. A good set of over-the-ear or rather around the ear headphones is going to be in the neighborhood of about $200. Again, that's approximately what broadcasters are spending. Jay?
Yeah, let me say this. I made a living mixing audio for a lot of years. I have Sony headphones that are probably 30 years old. that are still functional. I've got I've got Sennheisers. The only things that have really fallen apart on me over time is the plastic starts to deteriorate. You can replace cushions and things like that. But a good set of phones is something that will be useful to you for a long time if you take care of them.
Absolutely.
And you want a good ear seal, and you want something that's fairly linear, that's not distorted, that you're comfortable wearing. Maybe if you're doing a broadcast mix for an hour and a half, you want those phones to be comfortable when they're on your head. So buy good phones if you can.
Yeah, and you can find decent phones at $100, $150.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to say that the Sony, even the 7506s can be had for around somewhere between $80 and $100. They go on sale sometimes.
Yeah, Sony makes good phones too.
Yeah, at the low end, the 7506s are decent headphones.
Yeah.
Not so good in loud situations, as others, but
Yeah, there is no one perfect out there.
Yep.
But yeah.
Now, I'd be careful about, so another thing to be careful about headphones is virtually no headphones have a flat frequency response.
Yeah.
They all have some sort of coloration to them. They'll have an enhanced low frequencies, enhanced high frequencies. Everyone is different. And so you got to be somewhat careful about doing equalization when you're listening to headphones. Unless you really understand what you're listening to, what you're hearing, what your headphones are telling you, it's a matter of trial and experimentation. You do a mix, you record it, you listen to it on a couple of different places, take it out to your car, play it on your stereo at home, and see if what you hear, how close that is to what you thought you heard when you were mixing in your headphones. And then adjust accordingly. Let's see, any other questions? Is there a recommended hardware used to split an aux bus to go to multiple destinations? That's a good question.
Well, I guess the question would be, for what purpose?
Well, we talked about splitting the aux bus out to go to a headphone amplifier. We talked about splitting it out to go to an overflow room.
Isn't there there's usually more than one aux send though on a board, right? Why would you need one to go to two different places?
Well, because you don't want to be doing two different mixes. The same mix that would go to the broadcast would be the identical mix you'd want to put into the overflow room, the identical mix you want to put into your hearing assistance system.
So that would be like an audio distribution amplifier, which is a pretty common device. And it will take that line level input from a source, and generally audio distribution amplifiers usually come in increments of like 1 in by 4 out, or 2 in by 4 out, or 2 in by 8 out. And they allow you to get a buffered output, so that adding more outputs, doesn't affect the original signal. Unlike maybe if you took a single output and you just wide it or split it to multiple destinations, that can be fraught with a little risk, depending on if you have, electrical interference and things like that, ground loops, etc. Audio distribution lamp will let you also adjust the signal level to the increment you need to drive the next device.
Right, and each output can have its own different level.
Yep.
Let's see, anything else? What about noise canceling headphones? They cancel low frequencies better than high. That's true.
Yep.
Okay, so it's very interesting that using noise canceling headphones for mixing under these conditions has been something that has been talked about and is tried, and it can work. But let's talk about how noise canceling headphones actually work, because this is interesting. So this is kind of related to room acoustics. If you have sound coming out of a loudspeaker. Hang on a second. Let me.
I was going to say, I sort of think of noise cancelers kind of in the same vein as I think of echo cancelers, because they're sort of doing a similar task in that a noise canceller is actually doing an algorithm subtraction of the ambient noise that's steady state and low frequency, and essentially removing that. Echo cancelers look at a reference signal, and they do a subtraction as well. And I don't know, for anybody who owns noise canceling headphones, and maybe you've used them if you get on an airplane or a train, if you put on a pair of noise canceling headphones in absence of any other signal and you turn on the noise canceller, you'll automatically notice it gets quieter in your headphones. And if you add signal to listen to something, maybe it's programmed from an iPod or that's dating me, or some other audio source, and you turn that noise canceller on and off, you will not only hear when it goes off, you'll not only hear the noise you'll hear the ambient noise. I think there's also a secondary effect from noise canceling headphones that kind of give you the impression that you're losing bass response from the actual program material. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure if that's a psychoacoustic effect where when the noise canceller is engaged, the program audio, it's more pleasant to listen because I'm not hearing the noise, but you may also subjectively think you're not getting all of the signal. And I have noticed that, and I've had some concerns about using them for mixing for that reason.
Well, active noise canceling headphones actually have microphones built into them. So they are actually listening to your environment. And what they're doing is there's a circuit inside the headphones that takes the ambient sound and mixes it into the sound from your audio source. And it flips the polarity to 180 degrees out of phase. And the idea is when you have two identical signals that are combined, when they're completely out of phase, 180 degrees out of phase with each other, they cancel, completely silent. And so that's the effect that the active noise canceling headphones is trying to accomplish. The ambient noise from the room, it's inserted, you actually hear it out of phase at an equal level from when the noise canceling circuit is turned off. And so the effect is that this cancels out the noise from the room so that you can't hear it. Now, at very low frequencies or low frequencies work different in acoustic spaces than mids and highs do. They are very, very spacious sounds. They are non-directional sounds. And almost every room has some level of very low frequency noise in it. You may not even perceive it in your head or in your ears, but it's there. And when your headphones are trying to cancel that out, it can actually cancel out some of the low frequencies in your audio source. So yes, they can work. Just be aware of what they're doing so that you understand what's happening. And some work better than others. All right, if we have any other questions. Great. Okay, I think we've answered all of these questions.
Say, if you could ask the questions in Zoom, please, or not in Zoom, but in Discord, please. That would be best.
Yeah.
If you could ask questions in Discord, please. That way we can keep them all in the same place. So I'm gonna put your hand down. I see you,
Or hold,
Keith,
or
but-
hold it to the after show, and then you can ask us with
Yeah,
your
then you
voice.
can
Yes,
chat
if
after
you
too.
want to hang on a few more minutes, we'll go into the after show, and then we'll all be able to speak verbally to each other. All right. At this point, let's close out the show.
So the signal has gotten on the bus. Thank you, Marty.
Yes. So here's an interesting thing. So on Thursday afternoons at 4:30 Eastern Time, all of us panelists get together and plan what we're going to do for the next show.
Sunday afternoons.
And for shows, Sunday afternoons. Thank you. Sunday afternoons at 4:30 Eastern. We plan what we're going to do for the show that week and for several weeks thereafter. And we have some very, very interesting discussions. And if you are all interested, if you have time, you want to pop in, we're going to make that available to everybody. So if you want to pop in and be a fly on the wall and listen to the discussions, you can do that. Also, on Thursdays, we get on the call at 6 o'clock, an hour before the show starts. So if you want to come in early and listen and maybe talk to us during that time, you will be opening that as well next week. So an hour early on Thursdays and 4:30 Eastern on Sundays.
And if you
Isn't this kind of like watching how sausage is made?
I was just going to say the same thing. Come see how the sausage is made.
Well, I was also going to say, if you think you have something to contribute to the panel, it's a great time to jump in and kind of put
Absolutely.
in your 2 cents.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. The panel is open. We invite people to come on all the time. We have special guests, and people come in and out as they are able. Not all of our panelists are able to make it every week. So, again, if you have something to contribute, if you want to present a different viewpoint, we're here to learn from each other. So by all means, just contact me on the Discord. Actually, if we're going to open it up, just come in at 6 o'clock on Thursdays, and we will be happy to have you.
Or join us on Sundays.
So that's it for this show. We're going to go into the post show as soon as I close this out and stop the recording. I want to thank all of our panelists for really wonderful information and conversation today. I hope that all of you have enjoyed our time together. Perhaps you found it informative, enlightening, enriching, energizing, and motivating. We're going to get to a point where we're going to discuss production values, production techniques, and that is going to be a very interesting discussion that will be very motivating, I hope. So watch the Discord for agendas for upcoming shows and where you can find recordings so that you can review past shows, announcements of upcoming events, and contests that we may come up with in the future. So, for many of us, this is brand new ground, this whole thing about hybrid ministry, about webcasting, and we're all figuring this out together. And, it's an opportunity to do something different than what was ever done before. And, different is not bad. Different is not bad. Different is how we make progress. This is an opportunity to grow your ministry, to grow your membership to capacities that far outweigh the limitations of your sanctuary. I mean, how many televangelical ministries started in a basement or a garage? Not saying you have to do that, but I have talked to so many churches that are seeing more people come to their virtual services than would have attended on a typical Sunday in person. I mean, that's tremendous. That's not something you want to give up. So we'll see you next week. Our service continues. Bye for now.